Okay, we're just about to get started. And I'm just going to press record.
Yeah, you can press record.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first Housing Rights Advisory Committee at the City of Toronto. An exciting day, and I'm excited to see the committee members around the table. We also have one committee member joining us online, and we will do introductions in a couple of moments. I think we have two committee members online. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, great. So we will include them to the, good morning. So we're going to get started. My name is Elizabeth McIsaac. I will be serving as the chair of this committee. The clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, and in fact, we have more than quorum. We have full attendance. So this is off to an excellent start. And so we're going to begin. So welcome. This meeting is being held with committee members and staff participating both by video conference and in person here at City Hall in Committee Room number 2. Members of the public may also attend in person or observe the meeting on YouTube, so welcome to our public participants, observers. I ask for everyone for their patience today with any delays and technical issues, most of all patience with me. This is my first official city committee, so very exciting and things may go wrong. Just warning you. A few reminders. Staff, please keep your video turned off unless you are speaking or answering questions. Members of the committee and staff, please keep your microphones muted unless you need to answer a question or speak. So you each have your own microphone, and for you at home, you have your muting on and off. Members, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand so that I can identify you, put you on a speaker's list, or open the floor to you. And then when we identify you, you can turn your mic on. I also remind members, and we'll get into this, I think, a bit more when we are given a bit of a lesson in how the committee is going to work and motions and so forth. But if you have any motions on the agenda, they must be submitted in writing and can be emailed to the committee secretary at hrac@toronto.ca. I do believe this is going to come up again. If you're in the room, you can also write it on a piece of paper, and if you want additional support, one of the clerks at the table can help you as well. So that's how we would, when we get to motions. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement, and although we are meeting in different locations, we have people joining us online. The committee would like to acknowledge the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. It is also home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I think that when we do a land acknowledgement, I always go back to the meaning of words. An acknowledgement means to recognize a truth. And as we do this work on housing in the City of Toronto, I think it is essential that we center ourselves in where this land is and what has happened on this land that is what we call today Toronto. We know that there have been traditional peoples here for millennia, but we also need to think, as we think about housing and creating home, that this is about the effects of our settlement on housing, on inclusion, particularly for those who are most vulnerable, and often that means Indigenous peoples. So I think this is an important moment to just stop and center ourselves on that recognition. So we have a full agenda today. It's our first meeting. We're going to be receiving a lot of information. We may not be moving items at this point, but we might. But the point is to receive information, ask questions if it's not clear, and to hear from, I think we actually have 2 members of the public who want to speak to us. So this will be a full morning, and I'm looking forward to all of it. We have 8 items on the agenda, and we're going to go in order. So the first one is welcome remarks and introduction of members and staff. I will start, and I will try to be brief. I do want to recognize that this committee in itself is an important step that the City of Toronto has taken in advancing the right to housing in Toronto. It's about 5 years ago almost, in 2019, the federal government formally recognized the right to housing in federal legislation. under the National Housing Strategy Act. And it was important because it recognized the commitment that Canada has made under international covenants, that every person living in Canada has the right to adequate housing that is affordable, safe, and secure. When that passed, it meant that we had to make, once it's in legislation in Canada, it requires other orders of governments to acknowledge that, to fall into line, and to do what they can to advance this right to housing. Very often, the right to housing can become rhetorical. It's a great thing to say. We all want everyone to have a place to live. The reality is there are decades of work internationally defining what it means to do that work, what it means to realize the right to housing. How do you progressively realize it? How do we make sure that governments are held to account for that? And it's in that how that our work is going to get done, and which is why it's so important that we're here. We're going to hear later today about how this committee came to be. I have my own comment that I'm going to just make briefly, which was, I think that the City of Toronto did an excellent job of developing the 2020 to 2030 City of Toronto Housing Plan. Part of that re-articulated the Charter of Housing for the City of Toronto Charter of Housing, which recognized housing as a human right in reference to the federal legislation, in reference to our international commitments. That was important. But part of it also spoke to the different mechanisms for accountability that we will have in the city to advance that. One of those mechanisms was in something they called the Housing Commissioner, was to look at look at the establishment of a Housing Commissioner. When the City Manager's Office did its work, and you'll hear more about this later this morning, a couple of ideas, they fleshed out the roles and responsibilities, and instead of appointing a single Housing Commissioner for a variety of reasons, they put in place different roles and functions and funded them to make sure that that work got done. This committee is one of those pieces. We will hear about the other pieces that were put in place, but this committee has a very important role in monitoring what the city is doing on its housing TO plan, in looking at policies and programs that are part of the housing work of the city to ensure that they're bringing a human rights lens, to ensure that we are engaging communities that are impacted by the housing crisis and by housing precarity and by being unhoused, that we are able to connect with them effectively and bring their voice into the work of the city. I think that this is an incredibly important job that we have been given collectively, and I am extremely energized when I look around this committee that we're going to do this work together. And so that's where I'm going to stop. I will do my own introduction very briefly. My name is Elizabeth McIsaac. I'm the president of something called Matry, which is a private foundation here in Toronto. We've done a lot of work on housing as a human right, and we do a lot of work on a human rights approach to poverty more broadly. That's my day job. I think my most important job right now is chairing this committee, so I'm very excited to be here. And with that, I'm going to go to my left, and let's take about 3 to 5 minutes to introduce ourselves and maybe why you're passionate about being here. So, Councillor Gord Perks, to you.
Hi, I'm Gord. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you for starting us in a good way. My name's Gord. I'm the City Councillor for Parkdale High Park, Ward 4 in the City of Toronto. I'm also the chair of the City of Toronto's Planning and Housing Committee. So our committee provides advice to council on all matters housing and planning. Just a little bit about me. Before I ran for elected office, I worked as a community activist, mostly on environmental issues. So you can't use pesticides in Toronto because of me. I've been on council now almost 18 years. When Mayor Chow was elected, we all met with her, and I said, if there's one thing that I would want to do, it would be to work on the housing issues. I had a family member, a sister of mine who's no longer with us, who died as a result of being unhoused, basically. This is work that is profoundly important to me. And you also might remember I'm on the city's civic appointments committee, so I interviewed all of you. And like Elizabeth, I am just thrilled with the group of people we've put together and excited about the work that we're going to do together. So looking forward to it. Take care.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Harmy Mendoza, and I am the Executive Director of a charitable organization called Women Act, formerly known as the Women Abuse Council of Toronto. So we still have two official names, and what we do is everything and anything really related with complexities and how to eventually eliminate gender-based violence. So we do that through education, policy and advocacy, and community mobilization as well. Research is one important area of our work, particularly community-based research, and how do we implement those recommendations that are in front of us more often than not. And so our main work and what we do every day is we have this wealth of knowledge about what our community needs. Our community members keep telling us they are vocal, they are loud, but we are taking way too long to implement those recommendations. So that's what we do at Women Act. We work towards making that possible, and we work through different levels of government, municipal, obviously, provincial and federal, because gender-based violence issues interconnect with all those three levels of government and all of the divisions you can possibly think on each one of those levels. And so we're a small agency, actually. You would think that we're humongous. No, we're tiny, teeny bit, I would say. 6 full-time staff that work with me every day, that challenge me, that challenge the status quo, and we celebrate that within the context of what we can do. And so very, very nice to be here. Thank you for making this happen, and looking forward to our work together.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you for starting us off and sharing what you all have already. I'm really passionate about advocacy. I've faced homelessness. I'm currently residing in Toronto Community Housing, and I'm the tenant representative there, so I have a lot of boots on the ground experience on how we can implement housing for everyone, and I do a lot of work with Women's Act as well. So I'm just really grateful to be here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bahar Shatpour. I am currently at the United Way Greater Toronto as the Senior Manager of Regional Housing Policy. I've been doing housing rights work, tenant rights work, women's rights work for, most of my career, over 10 years at least. And I'm really excited about this committee because I think there's a lot we can do in Toronto, and there's been a lot of movement on housing, but those that are most impacted by housing and homelessness are still waiting to see the results and to see some of this work that we've been doing at the city and advocacy to be implemented. So I'm excited to be part of this committee. I'm not from Toronto. I moved here from Windsor when I was 18 and have experienced housing precarity and have learned from a lot of people who are resilient around the city. So I'm also really excited to learn from all the members. So thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joy Connolly, and it really is a treat to be here with you. I've worked my entire adult life in housing in one way or another, primarily in the nonprofit and co-op sector, managing co-op housing, creating, developing it, and then working for the last 20 or so years as a consultant for all three levels of government and many, many nonprofit groups. I'm here as a member of Right to Housing TO, and my excitement about the whole concept of the right to housing is it brings together all the different components of housing policy in a way that few other sort of models do. And so I'm very excited to be here and really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bee. I'm an anti-poverty advocate. I mean, poverty is so big, the area, but I mainly focus on 5 areas: housing, transit, employment, food insecurity, social assistance, and anything to do with poverty to bring a policy or systemic change. I am on and off homeless. Right now I'm homeless. Actually, to be in this committee is a miracle because I was 3 weeks late from the deadline. I got concussion. I couldn't even do the application. But with the help of city staff, so I tell them my answer and they help me to type in the answer in the form. And then because I don't have a computer, so I do it on the phone. And it's very hard to do any application with the phone because there's no save feature. You go in, and then you have to write something, especially the open question. You get out and write, and then you go in, you have to do everything from the beginning. It drives me crazy. But anyway, I'm glad that I got open the door. I'm in here, and so many people that I know that I collaborate with my work, advocacy work, and good to see you all. Yeah, I'm glad that I be here to have a voice, not just for myself, also for my peers who are homeless. To fight for the right to have a house or a place to move in. That is the fundamental. Without a place, everything go downward, hell, everything. So I want to get back to be strong, be on my feet. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Danyal or Dan Reza, and I'm a family doctor at St. Mike's Hospital. We have clinics throughout the community, so I practice, and I've been practicing in our clinic in Regent Park for about 10 years, where I was the physician lead for our clinic the first 5 years. We're a large family health team. We care for about 50,000 patients, and many of our patients face precarious housing, including, of course, mine and my colleagues, and that interacts with health in all sorts of different ways, makes it more challenging for people, obviously, to get housing, but also to maintain housing. And so this is an area that we've been engaging with as a family health team for some time, including partnerships with legal aid. We have a health justice program, so we work on housing issues from that perspective. We also have an income security program where our clinical staff work with our social workers and our income security health promoters. So our clinical practice interacts and intersects with housing in many different ways, which is why when I saw this call, I thought it'd be important to bring a health perspective because, of course, we know that a housing first approach is an incredibly important approach to give people the health that they need, but also when we build housing, we need to make sure that we have the appropriate wraparound services, including health and healthcare. And in fact, I moved to Toronto to become the physician lead in our clinic in Regent Park. And so my journey to the city was intimately tied to the city's housing policy. So it's nice now to be around this table.
Hi, I'm Saroja. I work with Social Planning Toronto. I'm a community planner there and very passionate about housing justice, worked in 5 different communities, mainly neighborhood improvement areas and emerging neighborhoods, organizing around various housing priorities, supporting consultations for the Housing Action Plan. I worked very closely with the Jane Finch Housing Coalition for many years, as well as residents in Thorncliffe and Flemington Park fighting AGIs, and also with Lawrence Heights and Bathurst Finch community members. And yeah, I deeply care about housing rights, especially in the inner suburbs, where there might be some, there might be some communities that are overlooked in terms of what they need in an urgent way. And yeah, just to give a little bit of background on Social Planning Toronto, it's a social planning council that's been around, I think, since the 1940s, maybe earlier. No, I think 1940s. Anyway, I just wanted to say that we do civic engagement, advocacy, and social research on social policy that impacts poverty in the city. And we do a lot of like coalition-based work, and work with community organizations and folks with lived experience. So anyway, super happy to be here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chase. I currently work at Parkdale Queen West Community Health Center. I work in the front lines with the homeless, getting them housing and outreach. As a young Aboriginal, I had to deal with trying to get community housing myself in the past. So I'm really happy to be here, trying to give back to the community. And thank you.
Thank you. And to go online, Anne Marie, can I put you on the spot to go first?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anne Marie Moulton. I am super, super, super excited to be in this space. Like completely gung-ho. I'm passionate about this work. I'm passionate about housing. I'm passionate about social justice work. I'm an advocate at heart. I'm also a social worker here in the city. I've worked for 17 years with youth experiencing housing and homelessness. I do have a really good working knowledge of what it is, and I do have a good understanding of how homelessness can really, truly affect lives. I've managed to help a lot of youth in this city find housing and get their feet back on the ground, get into school, get into university and all that. So I do understand that there are pathways out of homelessness, but I understand that it is a struggle, which is why I am super excited to be part of this working group, part of this team here to advise council as to how we're going to move forward and bring about the change that we're looking for housing rights in the city of Toronto, and especially for those who are sitting on the margins of homelessness and poverty. I was also part of the poverty reduction strategy here at the city of Toronto. So it's really complex. I do understand that this whole thing is complex, and that I'm hoping that in this space we'll be able to merge all the brilliant minds together, but put our hearts into the work and bring about the change that I know that we can bring here in the city of Toronto to combat homelessness and issues of poverty. So thank you again for the privilege to be part of this amazing advisory committee. I'm looking forward to doing good work with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. And Nicole.
Morning, folks. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I see some nodding. Amazing. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be in this space. I'm incredibly passionate about social advocacy as well as the to housing. A little bit about myself. I spent years working on the front lines, working in nonprofits, working to rehouse folks, make sure that they're not losing their housing, and that could be anyone from federally incarcerated people across Canada, as well as substance users. I am a part of a lot of the movements for no more AGIs, the rent strikes going on in Toronto, a part of those tenant unions. And as someone who has spent my formative years in Toronto housing, I recognize and really value that access to housing. So I'm really, really excited to be here, and I can't wait to hear everyone's thoughts and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to the committee. It's inspiring. We've got so much experience, expertise, and energy and passion around this table, and I'm excited to see what this is going to yield. So we've introduced ourselves to one another. There's some staff I think that it would be helpful for us to know who they are, so we'll give a couple of minutes to hear. I know you didn't say to introduce the clerks, but you're sitting at the table, so I can't not introduce. So why don't we start with the two of you?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda Wall. I am a committee administrator in the city clerk's office. Excuse me, it's a pleasure meeting you all today and hearing from all of you. I'm actually filling in for my colleague Jennifer Lynn, who you've probably received emails from. Unfortunately, she's ill today, so I'm happy to be here to help support the meeting today. This is to my right, also a member of the city clerk's team. This is Angela Machado. She's our committee secretary. You're in excellent hands, and she's a great support to myself and Jennifer and the team. So hope you have a wonderful meeting.
Thank you. And we have staff from the Housing Secretariat who are going to be supporting us on this journey. So over to you, Valessa, to start.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and good morning to the committee members. My name is Valessa Ferry, and I'm the Director of Housing Policy and Strategy in the Housing Secretariat. And I've been working in this housing space for about 18 years, so very pleased to see this committee being formed, and looking forward to working with you and seeing the good work that will come out of this committee. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Meredith Kratzman. I'm a Senior Strategic Policy Consultant with the Housing Secretariat. Really honored to be supporting this committee. I've been with the Housing Secretariat actually a little bit less than a year, but I've been around the city working in Toronto Shelter and Support Services and public health and broadly in community health and development for quite a few years now. So really looking forward to working with the committee.
Thanks, Meredith. Good morning, everyone. My name's Matt Hilder. I'm the manager of the program policy team here at the Housing Secretariat, with working with Valessa and Meredith to set up this committee, and really an honor to be here with all of you, and we're really looking forward to the great work and advice that's going to come from this group. I've been with the Housing Secretariat almost 3 years, and prior to that was in other places in the city, including Children's Services, working on affordable childcare. And really just a brilliant group of introductions. Like, that was a really great roundabout, so really keen to see where this committee goes in the future. And pass it maybe to Shanali next.
Hi there, I'm Shanali Chakraborty. I work in the city manager's office, and I won't likely be seeing you at every meeting or along the way, but I will be available to the group. So our office helped provide the recommendations to council to create this committee and where the governance leads. So if there was a desire in the future to make some changes to actually how the committee operates or is structured or its membership, that sort of thing, then our office is available to support that process, as well as other things that you might contemplate in terms of providing advice. So our office also is the lead on intergovernmental relations, and that might be a part of what you might contemplate, and you might seek advice from our office. And I'll be speaking more on item 3 today as well.
Thank you, Shanali. And I think on this side of the room we have clerks. I can introduce. Yeah, if you want to do an introduction, that'd be great.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So supporting the meeting as well, we have Karina Andrade. She is our WebEx host for today, so you may see her at future meetings. We also have another clerk in the clerk's office, Lynn Genova, who might be hosting some of the meetings. You might see her name in emails or working their magic in the background. Andrew Fennell is my staff. He's here to help just with some training and support for today's meeting. Further down the table, we have Gina Ang, who's also a committee administrator with the clerk's office. She's observing today and will be providing a presentation later today. Beside her, we have Carly Turpin, who is our manager of our boards, tribunals, and advisory bodies team. And at the end of the table is Vicki Long, who you will meet momentarily, as she is here with public appointments to do a presentation to you today.
Thank you. And I think it's just a really great reminder how many hands go into creating some of the work that we're going to do. So gratitude to all of the staff for working with us and getting us to this date so quickly in the year. At first I thought, oh my God, it's not going to be till March, but that moved really quickly, and thanks to all the people in the room. So thank you. So that's item number 1. Members, do you have any questions at this time? Checking online, seeing none. I would move then to receive the item for information. And all in favor, if I could see hands, please. Seeing hands online, we are 100% in favor, so motion carried. Thank you. There we did. We did our first motion with no hiccups. Excellent. I know. I think it's been captured on video, so I can do a little screen capture. So we can move on to item number 2, which is roles and expectations of public members. This is where we're going to learn about our job. There's a presentation from Robin Summers, Manager of Public Appointments, and Vicki Long, Project Manager, who just met Public Appointments Secretariat, City Clerk's Office. So I will turn it over to Robin and Vicki.
We're all set. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Welcome. It's really nice to see you all today around the circle, and very much appreciative of your time. And congratulations for getting through all of the interviews. I promise there's nothing else on that regard. I'm here to provide some information that I hope is helpful for your time going forward. So. Thanks again. We really appreciate your interest and for putting your name forward to be with us today. I'm going to go over some information with regards to your appointment. So as you know, you've been appointed by City Council as a member of the Housing Rights Advisory Committee. The committee is one of 8 current council advisory bodies. These advisory bodies play an important role in how the city engages with the public. Today's committee has a mandate, composition, and structure that are set out by the terms of reference. If you do require a copy of those terms of reference, I'm happy to provide it, but it's also available online, so feel free to reach out to me if you would like to see a copy of that. In terms of your role as a committee member, you are supporting council in making decisions around city programs and services. So the role that you have as members is to provide advice based on your experience, be it lived or living experience, based on your community work or professional work, based on feedback that you might gather from stakeholders and more. So City Council makes the final decisions. However, your input is very much valued, and your work on the committee is supported by staff who we've met today, in particular those staff from the Housing Secretariat and my colleagues and myself through the City Clerk's Office. I will also say, as Shonali pointed out, as the City Manager's Office as well. In terms of your appointment, all members of this committee are appointed for a term of office ending in November of 2026, specifically November 14th, which is the official end of the current term of City Council, so it aligns with the council term. And as a general reminder, members can only be appointed by council to serve on one city board, committee, or tribunal at a time. We mention this as I know many of you have many skills that you might have applied to other committees, but we just ask that you bear this in mind. In terms of conditions for your appointment, public members of the Housing Rights Advisory Committee must be a resident of the City of Toronto and remain a resident throughout your term, not to be an employee of the City of Toronto, any of its agencies or corporations, as well as not be a spouse, partner, child, or parent of a member of City Council. With regards to the meetings of the committee, you will get information from others in this room aside from myself, but to begin with, the advisory committee will hold a minimum of 4 meetings per year at the call of the chair and the director of the Housing Secretariat. Meetings are open to the public, and regular attendance at meetings is expected, so please notify staff in advance if you cannot attend. Members should also come prepared to discuss the items on the agenda and participate in working groups as required. So with regards to honoraria, we want to recognize and support your contributions as community members who are sharing lived experience by taking part in a council advisory body and maybe taking time away from other commitments that you may be spending time with or other professional commitments. So I want to start with that, as public members can choose to receive an honoraria of $125 per meeting attended for up to 4 meetings. Honoraria are not intended for members who serve as representatives in organizations or businesses where they are employed, but members can request that honoraria, as I mentioned, as we do recognize the time commitment you are putting forward. Public members who serve as chair or vice chair of the advisory committee are not eligible for any additional honoraria beyond what is provided for members. The honoraria are not paid for attendance at subcommittee meetings or events, but reasonable expenses incurred while attending to the authorized committee business can certainly be reimbursed. And I encourage you to contact the Housing Secretariat for further questions around this, as they will be able to provide guidance around honoraria throughout your term. Should you, for any reason, need to have a leave of absence from the committee, you may submit a request to the committee to take a leave for a period of time for any reason. A leave is required, however, if you do run or seek appointment to any elected office. Depending on how long you may need to be away from the committee's requirements and City Council may fill the vacancy while you're absent. So please do contact the City Clerk's office with any questions around leaves of absences. And again, if for any reason you do need to resign, we do ask that you be in touch with us as well. A resignation is required if your eligibility changes. For example, if you move outside of Toronto, or if you become an employee of the City of Toronto, or if you or a close relative becomes a member of City Council. So again, please notify the committee secretary and the public appointments staff, myself included, by email if you do need to resign for any of those reasons. And we ask that you indicate the effective date of that resignation. And lastly, I'm well aware that you all bring these principles forward, but we do want to provide a gentle reminder that you are making a very important contribution, which we appreciate, to the decision-making at the City Hall. And you're impacting how the city delivers its programs and services to residents all across the city. And so with that in mind, I just want to share some general principles that we all feel are important for all public board members and committee members to bear in mind. So one of the principles is to serve the public well. We know that you bring a willingness to strive to have a solid understanding of the board's overall goals and mission, and acknowledge the uniqueness of the responsibility that you have before you for the well-being of the city. We ask that in order to serve the public well, you work collaboratively with each other towards that shared purpose and communicate with the public in a respectful, fair, and open and efficient manner. With regards to fostering equity and diversity inclusion, we ask that you be champions to the city's commitment to a discrimination-free environment and value diverse perspectives and contributions. With regards to acting with integrity and partiality, we ask that you please conduct your duties with integrity in an objective and uninfluenced manner, and place public good before any self-interest. And finally, as champions of standards of public service, we ask and have no doubt that you will be upholding the highest standards of conduct and display the principles of integrity, objectivity, and confidentiality with regards to the leadership role you're bringing forward today. So thank you very much for your time. With going over those, we know that you bring that to the table. So I'll just leave you with a last couple notes. So in terms of contacting the City Clerk's office, there are a few times where we do ask that you please do so. please contact the committee secretary and the public appointments staff by email. If your contact information changes, we just want to make sure that we can continue to contact you on a regular basis. Should your eligibility changes, if you are requesting a leave of absence or a resignation, please let us know what the effective dates of those are. So that's all I have for you today. It was such an honor to meet you throughout the civic appointments process. If you have any questions, our email and phone number are up there, but I'm really excited for your work ahead, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Vicki. Are there any questions from the committee of Vicki? I think it was pretty crystal clear, but there's always room for questions. Yes, Bahar.
I was just wondering around subcommittees. I know that there's a minimum of 4 meetings for the main committee, but could you speak to how we could, if needed, create subcommittees, working groups?
Thanks, Bahar. I think I might leave that to my colleagues at the Housing Secretariat and city managers and the committee themselves, as it might be further information coming on that. So I'll leave it to them to answer. But thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? And I can't see online if anybody online has a question. Can you see? Oh, Joy, go ahead.
I have a question about confidentiality. This is a public forum. I guess my question is, what is confidential as opposed to the stuff we all deal with in public?
Thanks for the question, Joy, and I imagine there might be some more coming with regards to that question, but I think in general, any information that is revealing any personal information, personal situations that is not offered directly from the person themselves, I think is one thing to bear in mind. Anything that may be identifying others who are not in the room, speaking on behalf of others, I think that's also something to bear in mind with regards to like their contact information or any personal information of that nature. I think there will be some conversations where that question might come up in more specific context, at which case maybe that's a point in which you can contact the committee secretary or any clerks or city staff and for guidance around if there's any questions that come up at the future. Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm just checking online. There don't seem to be any questions there. Anyone else? Okay, then thank you very much. That was really helpful, and you may be hearing from us down the road if we have clarification. Thanks so much. So with that, I would move to receive the item for information. Can I see all in favor? I need to see hands online as well. Thank you. Everybody's in favor. Motion carried. Thank you. So this brings us to item 3, which is an overview of city governance and the Housing Commissioner review. And pleased to reintroduce Shonali, who will take us through a presentation.
Good morning, once again. So I had introduced myself already. I typically do an overview of how the governance of the city works and vis-a-vis the role of these council advisory bodies when we have a new body. With this one, I have a particular interest because I was involved directly in the review to create this body and to contemplate a housing commissioner. So I will also share some background on that. And then towards the end, we can field further questions around the structure of this particular committee and the interests and the questions around, subcommittees and so on. So, to kind of get into this a little bit, so just, and you know, I've put this into this particular overview because of the context of housing, and you know, I think we all know, and it was certainly part of the review to consider the fact that we have all orders of government that in some way have a role in housing. So it's kind of good background to just do a quick check about how our federated model works. Yep. Oh, do I? Oh. Okay, let's go back and see if that works.
We're just adjusting sound.
Okay. Okay, so I'll just pick up again. Hopefully that works for everybody. So we have a federated model of governance, right? The Canada's Constitution enshrines what the responsibilities are at the federal and provincial levels, and there is no constitutional recognition for cities. So cities are created by their respective provinces, and the amount of power that a city has is at the discretion of the province. And we know some recent examples of where powers were taken away or provided or changed when it comes to the City of Toronto. So this is important and was an important consideration in thinking about a housing commissioner for Toronto as well, in terms of what's the jurisdiction of the city. But just really at a high level, generally speaking, from that constitution, we know that the federal government is responsible for things like defense and banking and immigration, et cetera, and that the province is responsible for health and education, amongst a number of other things. And then what has typically been devolved to municipalities, and particularly, you know, in Ontario, include, you know, water treatment and roads and garbage collection, but also parks and recreation, land use planning, shelters, and so on. And the amount of not just power, but also requirements that have been devolved to the city has evolved over time, but we know that in the late 90s that quite a bit was downloaded to the city, and so there's significant responsibilities without per se full funding around employment, Ontario Work Supports and all of that. That's a broader context for this discussion around housing, as is the complexity of the fact that the city has, you know, jurisdiction for land use planning, whereas, you know, there's a national housing strategy. So without getting into all of this, it's just a little bit of context before we get into the city's particular governance. So the city is actually created under provincial law that changed in January 1st, 2007, where the city got its own dedicated legislation, whereas all other municipalities are created under the Municipal Act. So City of Toronto Act is what gives Toronto its powers, and that's what creates the power for council to create the committees that it does, create this committee, for example, among a host of other things. There are a lot of similarities to the Municipal Act and other cities, but there are some specific powers that Toronto has, including around revenue generation, et cetera. The other kind of bit of context here that I think is helpful too is to just think that the city wears a lot of hats, as do other orders of government. But if you think about the city, while it has those responsibilities that the province has created for it, it also it provides services, it funds services. So an important partner is the community-based sector, the voluntary sector, which it funds and supports from an institutional infrastructure level. It regulates certain matters within its jurisdiction. It has the ability to advocate, and that's an important piece for the discussion of this committee, and as well as partner, and it creates policy. So it creates policy within its jurisdiction, and there's other policies that are created by other orders of government, has the ability to advocate. It's an important voice in advocacy. So the city, through once the City of Toronto Act was created, has established that it can have direct bilateral relationships with both the provincial and federal government, which is unique among cities. So other cities in Ontario partner together as an entire group of entities, and then they have their intergovernmental relationships, but the city is separately from that, able to have a bilateral relationship with the federal government. So, given the powers that the City of Toronto Act provides, the power is vested with City Council, so the elected body, and then City Council is able to create other bodies through that power, and in some cases is required by legislation to do certain things. So there are other legislation like the Police Services Act or the public health legislation that requires the city to do certain things, but for the most part, power is vested in City Council. So I'll be talking about each of these boxes. So there's the direct services and programs and policy that the city enables through its public service, and the head of the public service is the city manager. But there are also, with a little bit of distance, the city is able to create agencies and corporations to also deliver services or operate businesses in some cases to generate revenue or for other purposes. Outside of that, there are accountability officers who provide oversight to this overall government, and those accountability officers are required in legislation in the City of Toronto Act, so we'll speak to that as well. So the structure that council has created for its governance, and with the introduction of strong mayor powers in late 2022, some of these powers are now with the mayor rather than with city council to create this structure. But the City of Toronto Act enabled the city to create community councils, so geographically based bodies to recognize the reality of Toronto post-amalgamation and its vast size. So those community councils that are named there also can have final decision-making on certain matters, so that's enabled through the City of Toronto Act, and council has delegated authority. So those are on local traffic matters or other items, so there's those bodies. The standing committees are now something that the mayor can create and give mandate to, so they're policy-based. So right now there are 4. Prior to 2018, there were more when council was double its current size. So when policy and other matters are coming forward to council, they're first considered through these policy-based committees according to their appropriate mandate, or they are considered by executive committee. So executive committee is chaired by the mayor and is made up of the chairs of the other standing committees amongst, as well as some other councillors. The chairs and vice chairs of those standing committees are appointed by the mayor. So the executive committee is very much akin to a mayor's cabinet without it formally being that. Council advisory bodies such as this committee provide advice through this decision-making process, primarily through executive committee, but also through the other standing committees as appropriate. So the standing committees have the ability to make decisions such as asking staff to come back with reports or referring those back or providing them forward to council. They don't actually make final decisions. Those are with city council. Community councils can make some final decisions. Council advisory bodies are not empowered to make decisions. They are able, the decisions that you take are to provide advice into this decision-making structure, so into council, but to be contemplated first by a standing committee. I might just pause here and add something that I'll probably speak to again at the end of the presentation, but there's an opportunity here for council advisory bodies to provide something that sort of differs from staff. And I'll speak a little bit to the public service, but the public service is there to provide evidence-based research and policy advice to council, as well, also through these standing committees. But a council advisory body such as yours, which is made up of members of the public that council has selected, can provide other advice from your perspectives, from lived experience, etc., as a complement to advice that is provided by the public service. So there isn't really a need that these two things need to be the same. The very purpose of the committee is to be able to provide some advice that the public service isn't necessarily in the position to do. So we'll speak to that again. In terms of the decision-making process, and this might seem like a technical slide, and I encourage you to go back to it. So you don't need to absorb this completely at this moment, and you'll have these slides. But the process by which things move through the decision-making process is that items are put onto an agenda for one of those bodies that report to City Council. So that could be the standing committees or Community Council. The way that those items are put onto those committees is there could be a report from staff, so that's the kind of evidence-based reports that we provide. It could be a report from another part of the city, like an agency or corporation. The mayor can introduce support, reports, and members of council can move motions as well to introduce items. And these kinds of bodies can also, through your advice giving, that also can lead to an item on those standing committees or executive committee as mentioned. Those bodies then do their deliberations. So the executive committee can get your advice and choose not to pass it on to council. That's possible. Or it will pass that along, just to kind of give you a sense of the powers of the steps in between. This is sort of like a cyclical process. There can be multiple rounds. They can send something back and ask for it to come back again. Once that standing committee or executive committee passes those recommendations on to council, then council will deliberate them and make a final decision. The public has an opportunity to weigh in, and I don't mean just the members of this committee as members of the public, but just broadly the public they can provide input through the engagement that's done by staff in the course of providing their advice. So there's often public engagement that's conducted. They can also attend meetings, such as this one or of the other committees, to provide deputations. And councillors do their own engagement as well with their constituents. So there's multiple places that the public can provide input. And then once a council has made a decision, there's a little bit there on the flow chart around the mayor's veto, which this mayor has indicated she won't exercise, but from a technical perspective, it's indicating how that decision flow would work. Once decisions are made, then city staff will action the decisions that are directed to them by council. So it is important to note that this body cannot direct actions to staff. It can provide advice to the committee. That's different from saying that you will be working with staff who are supporting this committee to enable you to give your advice. You might be interested in information that they can provide you, reports that have been done in the past or publicly available information. But an example of something that could not be directed is original new research to be conducted by staff to provide for contemplation by this committee. If you would like that to be done, you would need to provide that advice to council to say, can you ask staff to conduct this new report? Because you're not in the position to direct something that has a financial implication to staff. So just kind of reiterating, so the role of the public service, so our role, Housing Secretariat, clerks, et cetera, the city manager's office and other divisions, is to provide objective professional advice to the city or agency to whom we report. We have values that guide that, including being politically neutral and acting with integrity, applying judgment and discretion. We have a bylaw that governs the conflict of interest and neutrality of the public service, as well as the disclosure of wrongdoing and reprisal protection. So that is the first bylaw of its kind among municipalities. So there's a fairly robust ethical framework for the public service. I mentioned agencies and corporations, so they are a little bit more distant from direct oversight from City Council, but they are created by City Council. So they're created for different reasons, to meet, in some cases, legal requirements, or to operate in a commercial environment, or to focus on a particular objective that is best served with its own oversight of a board, or in some cases to engage citizens in board decision making. So there's varying levels of authority that agencies and corporations have. Examples are ones that you would be familiar with: the TTC, the Board of Health, the Police Services Board, the library. Those are really large ones. And in terms of the city's budget, more than half of it is spent on city agencies. So these more arm's length bodies actually deliver more than half of the municipal budget. And each of those boards have a mix of citizen members as well as elected officials. There's also community-based boards that you might be familiar with. For example, the 519 is one of the city's community centers. That's actually a city agency that has a similar board. Corporations are things like community housing and seniors housing corporation, but also Toronto Hydro. In some cases, those corporations provide a dividend back to the city. So in terms of accountability officers, that was kind of off to the left in terms of an oversight function to the rest of the city governance. There are 4, and these are required under legislation. So there's an auditor general that helps the city hold itself accountable for value for money. An integrity commissioner whose role is primarily over the conduct of elected officials, but also board appointees. So not appointees of a body like this, but the board members that sit on the TTC and public health and so on. So they provide advice for their conflict of interest and other conduct requirements, and also do investigations. A lobbyist registry is required under legislation, and the city has appointed a registrar to oversee that registry. And you may remember that there have been ethical challenges. This was in the early 2000s, that there was a large computer leasing scandal, and some of these features came in to be robust since that time, and the lobbyist registry is a part of that, and it's one of the largest registries in the country. And then the ombudsman mandate is to treat the public fairly and ensure that services are provided in a fair and equitable manner. And it's particularly relevant to this discussion around housing, because part of the framework that council adopted around advancing the right to housing was both this committee, but also a new unit within the ombudsman's office called the Deputy Ombudsman for Housing. So I'll speak a little bit more about that, but it's important to note that the ombudsman itself is a required position. So it's mandated, which means, and it's independent. All of these positions are independent, so they have a fixed term contract. They're not subject, to being fired when the mayor changes. There's the public service doesn't have a role with them. Like, there's a lot of ensuring of their independence so that they can do investigations. And they have legislative powers such as compelling evidence and that sort of thing. Okay, so now kind of connecting the governance pieces to this committee. So as mentioned, there's a number of committees, council advisory bodies. They're a growing list. There's likely going to be another one come the next council meeting. So I've listed the Housing Rights Advisory Committee there. These are created by council each term. So as mentioned, they cease at the end of the council term, but they're often reconstituted. So there are some up here that have been actually in operations for a number of terms with some continuity, and then others that are quite new. The City School Boards Committee is just new for this year, as well as your committee. The Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee only began last term. So there's some that are newer. So you've probably seen this in the mandate, in the terms of reference, in terms of what your role is. I would encourage you to go back to this fairly frequently as you contemplate what kind of advice you would give, and whether it's within your mandate, whether it's focused within your mandate. So City Council created this committee. Right? So this is what City Council has asked you to advise them on. So I would ground yourself in looking at the terms of reference and looking at this mandate, not to say that your advice around what you feel is urgently necessary around housing isn't also appropriate, but I just want to draw your attention to come back to this document over time. So, there's things that, like, aside from giving advice on the policy, programs, and action, it's to also ensure that the interests and needs of those with lived and living experience of housing precarity are reflected in the programs. There's a number of things. There's a mandate around advocacy and communication with other orders of government to recommend actions that they can take. So advice to council to say, please ask the province or the federal government to do X. Like, these are the kinds of things that you could be forwarding to City Council. There's also this piece around independently monitoring the progress of the action plan through publicly available data. I think these, we can read these words, but I would say why I'm saying to come back to them is that I think that part of a brand new committee that hasn't existed before is going to be to contemplate how you will actually do these things, what your work plan will be. And I know the Housing Secretariat staff will be working with you and will speak directly about the plan with you. But I think kind of thinking about, what is their role? What are the pieces that are always kind of progressing. There's the kinds of things that are constantly coming through to City Council, whether through Planning and Housing Committee or Executive Committee. Do you want to be advising on those things that you know that they're currently contemplating? Do you want to be raising up issues that are not on their radar screen, but you want to bring to their radar screen? Like, I think that these are going to be the deliberations of your committee and through your work plan. And I think in the course of developing that, what independent monitoring of the plan's implementation looks like is something that's going to be subject to discussion. And that's why it says with the data that'll be available to you and with your capacity to do so. And this may connect to your discourse around how often you meet and what ways that you want to meet, because in terms of your capacity. But I'll speak a bit more about there's your capacity, and then there's the capacity of the infrastructure for how often you can meet in an official way, in an official structure that staff can support, because council has also adopted a budget assuming 4 meetings and not assuming 10 meetings and not assuming 10 subcommittee meetings. So, we can talk a little bit more about that. In terms of the membership of and this is, for all of you, the membership criteria that needed to be met is that amongst all of you that there needs to be 4 members with a diversity of lived or living experience, housing precarity, discrimination, social or supportive housing, and homelessness. And then 7 representatives working in the fields listed, and then these demographic pieces. So, I'm sure there's like a number of you that meet more than one of these criteria for the committee to have been composed. But the composition was really deliberately thought about, and there was input provided, including from council members who made motions to add further criteria. So I've spoken to this in terms of the advice is primarily through Executive Committee. It may be possible that you would want to provide some advice through Planning and Housing Committee, and Councillor Perks is the chair, Planning and Housing, so he can also advise and guide you on some matters where he might suggest that strategically there's some value to which committee things go to. And then the procedures are things that the clerks can, again, guide you with. The procedures that you must follow also impact the notion of having subcommittees. So it is impossible to have meetings of this group that reach quorum when it's not an official meeting. Right? So there's other, if you're meeting together in small groups, it shouldn't be to advance the business of the committee. And that can be a risk in terms of having working groups. So the main thing is that these need to be thought out in terms of what you're trying to accomplish if you were to meet in small groups, like what purpose that is for, and whether or not that is contravening the procedures. Because this is a committee created by council very deliberately and aligned with the kinds of procedures that council operates in, and council operates in public, and council shouldn't meet outside, councillors shouldn't meet outside of these meetings to have quorum, because we want transparency in government. We don't want councillors to meet in a little group and make a decision and then come to a council meeting that's open to the public and streamed on YouTube, but actually they've already made their decision, and you're to operate with similar principles as well. So this is an official body of council. It's not a reference table the staff is meeting with, or a community group the staff is meeting with, which doesn't have those kinds of restrictions. So I think those are things for you to think about as you contemplate what else you may wish to do, is to know that that's what this body is. So let me just see. There's a few reference pieces here for you, terms of reference, other information from public appointees you may have. But there's also an introduction to Toronto's government with a number of links. So that's a web page with a number of links. And if you wanted to get into the weeds, city planning, or lots of other, divisions, you can go to that website. I do have a few more slides specifically about the Housing Commissioner review, but I'm happy to, well, maybe I should get to the end for procedurally and then take questions. The Housing Commissioner review really was rooted in the housing TO, like the 10-year action plan and the adoption of the housing charter that made the city's commitments around the progressive realization of the right to housing. So City Council asked the city manager to report back on options for a role and function for a housing commissioner to independently assess the implementation of those two pieces, the charter and the action plan, and to ensure that the city was taking concrete actions to combat systemic housing discrimination and systemic hurdles in the housing system. So to do so, the city manager engaged external experts to inform options. So Fiona Crane was the city's former ombudsman, and the Maytree Foundation were retained. And out of their review, so the review is available, hopefully I put the link in the presentation to all of council's decisions. But the review that was the outcomes of the review that were provided to council included these recommendations in their report, which were to create a local locus of accountability to advance the progressive realization of housing as a basic human right. Things are quite decentralized at the city, and we know that there's complexity from an intergovernmental perspective, and I've spoken about agencies and corporations. Some of them are involved in housing, so you can imagine that there is not actually a single locus. So that was one of the recommendations. Focus on policy development and services through a human rights lens, ensure evidence-based monitoring, provide advice to council from experts and community members with lived experience and expertise in a human rights-based approach to housing, and that is linked to the creation of this committee. Enable an all-of-government approach, so the city's leadership around intergovernmental pieces, including the piece around the intergovernmental dialogue, and then develop system competencies and performance metrics. So that's really for the public service to develop, and then develop a robust human rights learning and development program, again, for the public service. So based on those recommendations in the consultants review, these are what council decided to do. So they created this committee with the mandate that we've discussed. They've funded the Deputy Ombudsman Housing and a housing unit within the Office of the Toronto Ombudsman. So that provides for a unit that has the independent capacity for independent oversight to do investigations related to systemic issues and play its role with a distance from council and the public service around the advancing the progressive realization. And then this piece is for the public service to do potentially in collaboration with the ombudsman, but to get external expertise on an independent assessment of the city's progress. The direction was to Housing Secretariat to procure and implement a program for human rights training for housing across the organization, including agencies and corporations. And then at the outset, when the decision was made, it included sending a letter to the federal housing advocate. And there could be more intergovernmental engagement that takes place. Those are things for you to advise on, as well as others. Okay, I'll make sure that the one we post has the decision link for the report review, but I'm going to take this down and field any questions. And I realize I didn't include my contact details there, but we can add that to the slide that we post.
Thank you, Shonali. That was complete. I feel like I just earned a degree in municipal governance. It's excellent. But there was a lot in there. So let's pause and see if there are questions from any of the committee members. And I will also ask to get the screen up so I can see if anyone online wants to ask a question as well. So yes, Danielle.
That really was great. Thank you. You mentioned at one point that the public service and advisory committees provide different sorts of advice, and there are some sorts of advice where the public service isn't in a position to give. Can you kind of speak a bit more to, I guess, like speaking in the negative, like what is the sort of advice that you're not in a position to give?
I guess I would just say like a really strong advocacy position, right? So the public service is being asked by council to report back on something, and that might include what one might term as advocacy, but it really is, its duty is to provide back on what council has asked, and with evidence and analysis, but you can speak to things that council hasn't asked for. Right? Not that the public service can't. The public service can take initiative and say, you know, we're seeing a rise in X in the city and I need to bring this to council's attention. Like, yes, they can. But I do think that, you know, there are, like, you have more freedom than that because you're not an employee of council. You can raise issues that you are seeing from lived experience that perhaps, and when I say the public service isn't, I'm not saying they're saying, oh, I know this and I'm not saying so. I just think that they're tasked with the job they have. They might not have the complete view of all that is going on that you might. So I think the notion is that it's a complementary piece. It's not, you're not meant to affirm and say, yes, public service, you got that right. It's to be able to provide something original to council. I think that's why they've appointed you. I don't know if Councillor Perks wants to add anything to that.
So there are a couple other pieces. One piece is that the Toronto Public Service has to give us the kind of advice we ask for. So if we tell the Toronto Public Service, tell us how to build a blue house, they have to tell us how to build a blue house. We could say, no, red houses are better, right? So it gives a way for opinions or advice to council that is different than what the public service has been directed to do to get there. Also explicitly built into our terms of reference, we are performing, in a way, an oversight and accountability exercise. So the public service has been charged with doing certain things. Council has imposed a human rights lens on how we approach housing issues. And part of what we do here is to give advice on whether we're actually carrying that out. So that's a separate piece that would be different than what the public service would do.
Thank you for that. I was going to actually ask that question because I think the...
I should go sit with the staff.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask because I think it's understandable, or it would be easier for me to think about a position that could support, and I would see that maybe that's what happens the most of the time, but my question was going to be more around, has there been any situation where a committee like this has actually expressed an opinion or a recommendation that is not quite similar to what staff is proposing? Has it been, and can you elaborate, and how did they navigate it through it, if I may?
I can speak to one that's pretty sensitive, which is, you know, as the city was developing its reconciliation action plan, and the Indigenous Affairs Office was developing it, and they're doing a lot of engagement on it with community, you know, bringing it to the official committee body is something, you know, I don't know that in that case they would want to not know if the committee has concerns and not make adjustments and then have it, you know, go to council. Like, I think the whole premise of developing the plan was around engagement. And so that's a case where the committee still may have said, but you're not going far enough, or this isn't enough, or whatever it may be. But I think the staff were very, very interested in what those concerns could be in advance. And I'm sure those kinds of situations will also occur. And, you know, in that case, maybe it wouldn't have been beneficial to have something conflicting, and rather have staff, you know, be aware of that. And I think that the Indigenous Affairs Office is very aware around, like, you know, there's a direct voice between the committee to council, right? And I think they would be very aware that they want to ensure that is preserved, right? So I'm just giving that like one example. I don't know offhand, but I think that the CABR, like the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit that supports the CABRAC, works very hand in hand with that committee, right? Trying to support the agenda and et cetera. So like, I don't know that they would have that, but it's not just the program area that we're talking about, right? The committee could be opining on something far removed from the program area that supports them to say, I don't think, I don't know, whatever division who did this other thing. Like, they can give opinions on that, right? And maybe staff never even came to that committee, right? So I just think that you have the opportunity to comment on more. But I think staff, if the staff knew that you were going to comment on something they're bringing forward, then they would be interested, in attending and getting your thoughts.
Are there any other Bahar and then Danielle? And then, sorry, yep, and Marie.
Speak to any instances where other advisory committees have worked together, if there's an item that intersects, especially given housing, how it intersects with so many other.
So this is, not specifically, but I think this is an issue that's been, or a concern that's been raised, which is, there's, the membership of this committee already is really diverse, but then you also have the 2S LGBTQ committee, or, the accessibility focus committee, and how we're enabling intersectionality and a view that way. So we have discussed it with the program areas and clerks, a very little bit, to say, does it make sense to hold joint committee discussions when there's a large strategic piece that otherwise is going to be talked about at every committee. So I think that that's just something for program staff to maybe kind of keep an eye on, or clerks, or it's something more in the back end that we need to be thinking about, and whether that makes sense and whether it's feasible, and I know scheduling of these committees are a challenge, so scheduling something like that. So sometimes it's the logistics that get in the way, but staff have flagged how they're going and having a similar discussion at every group.
Danielle, and then Anne Marie. I think you had your hand up.
On a similar theme of working together, how does, and this is probably a longer answer, so it doesn't have to be answered fully today or right now. How does the city public service interact with the public service of other levels of government? And I'm asking that question because, of course, as you mentioned, housing, all levels of government have that responsibility, but I'm asking from my healthcare lens. For example, if we wanted to understand how the city's housing plan interacts with how the province is thinking about primary care. How do we make those connections happen? How is it already happening in the city public service between the respective ministries at the province? What sorts of things can happen automatically? What sorts of things require us to give advice to city council to direct staff?
So I'll just in brief, I'll ask Valessa too, when she does her presentation, if she has any comment at a program level when they discuss things intergovernmentally. I think, so just a couple of thoughts I have to your question. One is, I think this committee can invite guests from other orders of government to do a presentation, that is possible to do, and that might be of some interest. I think other than the program area maybe speaking to some of those discussions, there are we could have a presentation here from our intergovernmental staff to talk about it in more detail. But I would say, just a couple of thoughts I have, because I think that this committee has lots of ideas and is keen, and this is its first meeting, is to just get started, right? Just get started on the work and with the work plan, and in the course of doing so, make decisions of whether you want a speaker or whether you want someone from intergovernmental, without for lack of another word, overthinking or needing it to be more or different. That would be my advice.
Anne Marie?
Thank you. In listening to you, I think I overheard you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the executive committee can get our advice and choose not to pass it on to council. Would you be able to elaborate a little bit more on that? What would be, for an example, give an example of what we could have discussed that would potentially not be able to go past for discussion and get to council?
So I'll just be radical and say the committee adopts advice to say dismantle Community Housing and Seniors Corporation, in the next 30 days, an executive committee might be like, yeah, we're not doing that. So I just mean the potential exists for you to make a recommendation, for them to say, yeah, not doing it. Like I'm just saying procedurally it exists. Now, just sticking in, Councillor Perks is on executive committee, is the chair of planning and housing, and I think he would likely at least advise you whether he thinks he might say, give that advice anyways, get it on the record to dismantle what, I'm just saying. So sometimes you're not giving advice because it has to go through, but because you want it on the record. Like there's lots of strategic reasons that you might provide advice.
Thank you.
Saroja.
So I think you mentioned around the working groups that generally working groups shouldn't be necessarily trying to, and I could have gotten this wrong, but necessarily trying to advance certain priorities or agendas of the Housing Rights Advisory Committee. Can you speak to the benefits of the working group and what can be productive about the working group and what can be done with a working group? Because I understand that a lot of people put a lot of time and energy into working groups, and so I want to know what's best in terms of our best use of time.
I mean, I guess what I would say is to kind of, my advice would be to wait a little bit before contemplate. I don't know, unless Councillor Perks wants to.
I think I can clear this up. We can't have a majority of this committee ever sit down out of public view and make a decision about what we should do here. So if we're going to set up a working group, the way you protect from that is not to have a majority of this committee on any working group. That was the point she was trying to make.
But I would also say that, I don't know that you can necessarily guarantee that staff can support those either, right? Staff are budgeted to support these meetings. So if you're getting together on your own to do something, it's on your own outside of quorum, right? And then so you guys can kind of decide whether that's worth doing.
Is there a distinction to be made between subcommittee and working group in terms of what that involves with staff support?
I don't actually think so, but I think that subcommittees are not really on because council hasn't mandated, it's not in the terms of reference that you can have them. If you have these things called, informal working groups, it's something you're choosing to do on your own to get together.
Okay.
Council Perks can get that clarified, but I don't, it's not what has been funded and contemplated by council to say you're going to have these additional meetings.
Gord?
Sorry, it's like I'm staff today.
Yeah.
So some committees of council have the ability to create subcommittees. Subcommittees are supported by clerk's office, their meetings are open, all those rules apply.
Yeah.
Advisory bodies don't have that authority. We can't say to the clerks, you've got to support a subcommittee and set up the Zoom and the WebEx and put out public notice. We don't have the authority to do that. We do have the authority to say, why don't 4 of us go and think about this and bring advice back to the full advisory committee. That's the distinction.
Okay, thank you. Nicole, did I see your hand go up? Or was that just a twitch in my eye? Okay. It was out of the corner of my eye. We're good. Does anyone else have a question for Shonali at this point? Harmy.
It might be something that we might leave for later because I know you mentioned Valessa and her presentation, and my question is about, we've been hearing a bit about, to your point, Daniel, intergovernmental, intersectionality. That's also a little bit of what I work within in my daily job. And so I think that thinking about working or aligning our advice to other levels of government, I can't help but also think about our own in-house municipal City of Toronto divisions, departments that are also interconnected. And so wondering if that's something we will hear about or also kind of consider and start thinking a little bit as we engage into this work.
Yeah, I think that the Housing Secretariat will speak to, the way that things are interconnected on a housing front at the city and how intergovernmental works.
Great. Are there any more questions before we let Shonali go? Oh, sorry. Yeah, Anne Marie.
I think in the best interest of getting started, so we can get on to getting the work done, what we could do is just allow the preliminary stages of things to just work itself through so we can get to the next steps. Because I think we all come in here with the passion and the ready to go type of passion and fire to do this work. But I think we should just like allow the process to happen till we get to those that point, because then we could be here all day asking all these questions, because it's a lot that was shared with us, and I'm sure we can regurgitate some of the material after, but I really think we should just get started on the next steps so we can get ourselves prepared to do this work. That's just my feedback.
I think that's well said. So, and I think that captures some of what was shared. So thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you, Shonali. So assuming that there's no more comments at this point, I'm going to ask that someone move to receive the item for information. Thank you, Bahar. And all in favor, show of hands. All good, carried. Thank you very much. And thank you, Shonali. And there's lots to read there. So to Anne Marie's point, I think we have our work cut out for us to dig into these documents and really come to the next meeting ready with ideas about how we organize ourselves around the work itself. Okay, so this takes us to item 4 on the agenda, which is meeting processes and the simplified rules of procedure. So we have a presentation from Gina Ang, Administrator, City Clerk's Office, who will give a presentation on meeting processes and the simplified rules. Gina, over to you.
All right, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gina Ang, and I'm an administrator with the... Oh, thank you very much. All right, good morning. My name is Gina Ang, and I'm an administrator with the City Clerk's Office. Today I'll be sharing a presentation on the meeting processes and the simplified rules of procedures. So the Housing Rights Advisory Committee operates in accordance with City Council's simplified rules of procedure. Simplified means that they are a pared-down version of City Council's rules of procedure based on the same principles and tailored to meet the needs of an advisory committee. The principles that form the simplified rules, as well as the City Council procedures, are the members' rights listed on this slide. For example, the majority of members have the right to decide, and the minority of members have the right to be heard. It is expected that the members of an advisory body come to this table with different viewpoints, and that these principles safeguard the rights of all members to participate equally in the meeting. The simplified rules set out the role of the chair and the vice chair essentially. The chair, or in the chair's absence, the vice chair assures that the progression of business by ensuring that the agenda items are fully considered and decided upon, and that the order and decorum is maintained. At this first meeting, the Housing Rights Advisory Committee will elect a member as vice chair, and all members are eligible to serve as vice chair. The simplified rules also set out the responsibilities of the members during a meeting, and you can see them listed here. If you recall, one of the foundational principles that underpin the rules is that all members have equal rights, privileges, and obligations, and this sets out the obligations. Another principle is that all decision-making takes place in public. The public may attend any meeting, in person or virtually, and may submit written comments or present to the committee on any item on the agenda. The agenda itself serves as notice of the meeting. Only items included on the agenda may be discussed, as the public has received notice only of these items. Members may not conduct business materially, which means materially advance the progress of any agenda item, outside the meeting itself. Also, all meetings must begin and end in public, but that doesn't mean that they must always be public from beginning to end. There are 14 circumstances set out in the City of Toronto Act that would make it appropriate for a committee to close its meeting or go into closed session, and a couple of these are listed here, such as personal matters about an identifiable individual, including a city employee or local board employee, or litigation or potential litigation affecting the city. So you will have received an agenda for today's meeting. The agenda lists the items of business in the order in which they will be considered. The committee secretary prepares, publishes, and distributes an agenda for each meeting. Agendas are published online to the city's TMIS, Toronto Meeting Management Information System website, and we will send you a link once the agenda for the meeting is available. You are also encouraged to sign up for e-updates in order to receive notifications that pertain to the committee, including when an agenda has been published. The agenda contains a lot of information, including links to all the documents that have been submitted to the meeting. The agenda is a live document. Once it's published, revisions are updated in real time. So agenda items. The simplified rules established how an item can be added to an agenda. You as committee members may add items to the agenda. If you have an idea for an agenda item, please reach out to program staff from the Housing Secretariat, Meredith Kratzman, or to the clerk's office, either myself or my colleagues, and we can help you finalize your item with respect to both content and form, and also to make sure it fits within the scope of the committee's mandate. Agenda items may also be placed on the agenda by a member of the advisory committee, such as yourself, city council, a council committee, a local board of the city, and a city official. Each item has a unique identifier. It's a combination of the committee code. So for this committee, it would be HS, the meeting number. For this one, it would be 1, and the agenda number. So this item, being HS 4.1, is the 4th item on the first meeting. Many items are relevant to the city as a whole, so the ward number may be listed as all, but there are some items that are ward specific, and so you'll see a specific ward number. Some items originate with a report or a presentation or a letter. So again, if you as a member of the committee would like to bring forward an item for an agenda, a way to do that would be to submit a letter prior to the agenda closing date with a summary of your item and recommendations you would like the committee to adopt. And the summary would provide a bit of history or context for the item. And lastly, some items have recommendations for the committee to consider and vote on. So there is an order of business that you will see on every agenda, including the one that is before you today. The chair calls the meeting to order once quorum is present. The chair will call for confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting, and you would have had an opportunity to review them online, but not today because this is the first meeting of the term. Then the committee would consider each item one at a time, and once the agenda is complete, the chair adjourns the meeting. There is no motion required. We at the clerk's office will do our best to get the minutes posted no more than 2 business days following a meeting. So there is an ordered process for disposing of each item. The chair would bring the item forward. There may be a staff presentation offered by a city official. There may be public speakers who have registered to address the committee, and committee members may also ask questions of the public speakers if you wish. Members may also ask questions of staff and speak to the item, which is also your opportunity to move motions. And of all these steps, only the first and last must take place. The item has to be called forward and the committee must vote. Right, so how do council advisory committees give advice? The committee must vote because there must be a decision on every item. Through its decisions, the committee fulfills its role as a council advisory body. Please note, though, that the committee may not direct city staff or make binding decisions on behalf of the City Council or the City of Toronto. A recommendation that requires action by city officials or City Council must first be considered by the appropriate council committee, and when it's necessary, then approved by City Council. Housing Rights Advisory Committee may by motion decide to receive the item for information, which means to acknowledge the matter and take no further action. Adopt the recommendations, which means to approve the main proposal as presented. Again, this will usually be in the form of a recommendation. Amend or add new recommendations, which means to vary the main proposal or to propose an additional action. Defer which means to postpone consideration until a specific time or until a specific condition is met, or to refer, which means to send the item to a specific person or decision body. Motions to amend are substantive, and we need these in advance when possible. City clerk staff will help prepare motions and with your permission, will seek input from program staff if necessary. These proposals must fall within the scope of the committee's mandate, must be typed and displayed, and should be read aloud so that the proposal is clear to everyone. Voting is one of the responsibilities that all members have. So all members must vote unless prevented by law. Majority vote is required to pass a motion. Motion fails if the vote is tied. Now, in a hybrid meeting setting like today's meeting, members in the committee room can vote by show of hands, and members online can vote by show of hands with video or by voice if video is not on. If a recorded vote is requested, the clerk will call out the name of each member, and the member will state in favor or opposed. So the Housing Rights Advisory Committee has 12 members, and 7 must be present for quorum. If you are going to be absent, please let us know in advance so that we can prepare a motion to excuse absentees. Minutes will be paperless and will be available online. Minutes are prepared without note or comment, and we will only record decisions taken by motion. We do not keep track of discussions. And so that is my presentation for today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gina. That was really clear and really helpful as we get used to how we're going to behave properly and in order. Are there questions for Gina? Yes, Harmy.
One hopefully quick question. Could you give us an example of when would you defer a motion? What's the rationale behind it?
There are several reasons why. One might be if perhaps not all of the information might be available at the time. It could also be if perhaps if there is some issues with quorum at the meetings, items might be deferred to the next one so that all members could be present. It's really kind of up to the member when it might be appropriate. You can also come up and ask us if you have any questions.
Are there any other questions? I don't see any online. I don't see any in the room. Does anyone else have comment? I think we're good. So I would ask for a motion to receive the information as presented. Thank you, Danielle. And we should have a vote. All in favor of receiving, seeing online, everyone's in agreement, carried. Thank you very much, Gina. And that brings us to the next item, number 5, which is building a common understanding of housing rights. When we were beginning this, my opening comments talked about the fact that housing as a human right is sometimes rhetorical, in that it's a set of words that people believe in and believe it's true, but don't necessarily understand what's behind it. What does it mean? What does it entail? And so I asked one of our committee members, Bahar, who has spent many years working on many of those pieces behind, what's behind the right to housing, to do a short presentation to begin to orient us to a shared definition of definition and also operating knowledge around the right to housing. So Bahar kindly agreed to do that with us today. So over to Bahar.
Thanks so much. Okay, so I think we got a bit of information, thanks Elizabeth, in the beginning to kind of orient us around what the right to housing means. You know, I don't think I need to repeat why we need to take, really look at housing and homelessness issues in the city, and the struggles that many people are facing today. So what I'd like to do is really kind of orient us in terms of where the right to housing comes from and some of those principles and standards that can help us really think about our work today. So when we talk about the right to adequate housing, I personally find that sometimes we speak about rights and it can be a bit too theoretical, but it doesn't really have to be. It can be very practical and it can be simple. And really the end goal, really thinking about the end goal, which is everyone, irrespective of their income, their walk, you know, there are different socioeconomic characteristics, can have an accessible, adequate, and affordable place to live. So the right to housing really, it comes from different covenants internationally, but the main one is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which is ICESCR. And it's a right of everyone to an adequate standard of living, including adequate food, clothing, and housing, and to the continuous improvement of living conditions. And internationally, Canada ratified this in 1976, and we made a commitment to respect, protect, and fulfill the right to adequate housing. And then domestically, in 2019, we passed the National Housing Strategy Act, 2 years after the federal government introduced the National Housing Strategy, which is Canada's 10-year housing plan, to really think about how the right to adequate housing can be adopted and implemented domestically. And the NHSA, it provides all levels of government, so federal, provincial, and municipal, with a set of principles to follow when they're implementing rights-based policies. And I'll get to that shortly in terms of what we mean by rights-based policies. The City of Toronto has been one of the few municipalities actually across Canada that updated their housing charter, which is the Opportunity for All in its 2020-2030 Housing Action Plan, where there's a policy statement that recognizes that housing is essential to the inherent dignity and well-being of the person and to building sustainable and inclusive communities. So in terms of what's practical and how can we really think about the right to housing, there are two things to kind of consider. One is that there are 7 standards to what makes a home adequate. So a house isn't just 4 walls and a roof. It comes with a set of standards that makes it really, I like to think of it as a home. So the first one is security of tenure. And that's really the fact that people should have the legal protection against forced eviction. They shouldn't be harassed out of their home, as well as other threats to their tenancies. Affordability is a standard as well, that housing costs shouldn't threaten or compromise people's enjoyment of other basic needs and human rights, like the right to food, right to health. Habitability is important, and that's that people should have access to structurally sound, meaning well-maintained, well-repaired places that they can live and it doesn't impact their health and their safety. Location is also important. You can have access to a home, but if it's cut off from employment, healthcare, transit, schools, etc., then that's really not a home. It's just four walls and a roof. Accessibility also is another standard where people should have the access to housing that's adapted to their needs. And that's kind of really thinking about accessibility from a structural perspective, but it's also around access to housing too. So they should not face discrimination in accessing the housing that they need. The sixth standard is really around cultural adequacy, that people should have access to housing that's culturally appropriate. And it also, that housing should enable the expression of different cultural identities and diversity of housing forms. And lastly, the availability of services, materials, facilities, and infrastructure. That's a standard, it's a mouthful, but really it's around having access to proper infrastructure like heat or transit, as well as essential services. So when we really think of these standards, they're really the basic conditions that have to be present at minimum for housing to be considered adequate. And then in addition to the standards, there are certain principles around the right to housing that have been also adopted. And these principles are really, I've put them up here in terms of really like high level what they mean. But first and foremost, it's efficient allocation of resources. So ensuring that the maximum available resources are allocated to housing programs and implementation of policies. If we don't allocate the resources, then we're not really able to implement those policies and ideas that we have. Another principle is prioritizing those most impacted. So we know the affordable housing crisis across the country is really impacting everyone. Some people aren't able to buy a home, but some people aren't even able to live in a safe and adequate home. So when we're really thinking about the crisis and issues of housing adequacy, really thinking about how do we identify those most impacted, how do we measure it, and those measurements also really need to be equitable so that our responses are equitable as well. And then the third principle is meaningful engagement. So when we think about engaging with communities and those most impacted, how do we consult with them? Are we consulting folks throughout the process? Or is it just the beginning? And how do we prioritize the voices and the participation of communities that are most impacted by inadequate housing? And lastly, realization over time. So we can't really get to the right to housing overnight, but we can get there through long-term planning and really thinking about solutions that can be adopted over time through bylaws, policies, and procedures, and really going back and seeing what didn't work, what wasn't implemented, and being able to do that in the next iteration. And my last slide is around what's the rights-based housing approach. And that's, there's a rights-based approach in all programming and so on, especially the United Nations kind of uses that in a lot of their program evaluation. But when we're really thinking about rights-based housing approach, which is specifically stated in the City of Toronto's 10-year housing plan and the housing charter, what it really truly, like in its simple form, what it means is for governments to align their policies and implementation plans with human standards and principles that we just talked about in the other slides. And so to do that, there are a few things. First, you assess the systemic housing challenges to understand and identify the causes of these challenges. That's really important. What are the root causes? And then what housing needs aren't actually being met. Then that's when you can then develop a clear framework for action that considers those root causes of housing issues and then focuses on creating your processes and outcomes, which I think is a really interesting way for us to really think about how do we implement the right to housing over time. And then from there, then this approach then can support decision makers. So the advice that we're giving to develop roadmaps to outline practical steps that they can take over time to advance the right to housing across communities. So really thinking about maybe some ideas work for one community and some don't for others. And lastly, like any other plans that need to be adopted properly and processes and so on, how do you monitor that progress to ensure that it's effectively being implemented? What are the internal ways to monitor that progress, as well as outreach maybe to communities? And I think it's an interesting part of our work here. Being able to monitor and bringing the voices of the communities that we're here to represent, as well as I think a big piece of that is around accountability, right? We're trying to solve problems have long-term solutions, and how do we help government be accountable to ensuring that the decisions and commitments they've made can truly come to fruition. So that's it on my end. Thank you. And I don't know if I'm going to open up the floor for questions, but.
Stay where you are. Thank you, Bahar. And I think that gave a really good overview of some of the tools that we need to bring to bear to our work. Are there questions from the committee to Bahar on what she just presented? I don't have the online view of who's. There we go. Thank you. Yes, Joy.
This isn't really formulated as a question, and I think maybe it's not a question for you, Bahar, but for Elizabeth. I'm sort of coming through this meeting, I'm thinking, putting together two ideas. One is, we've heard a lot about sort of the formal structure of how we work, motions in advance, all that kind of stuff, and all those protocols. And at the same time, I see the richness of the people in the room and the variety of experiences. And I see, Bahar, your sort of last slide of sort of like the human rights approach. And so I'm wanting to picture in my mind both upholding and respecting the formal structure in which we operate, and yet also wanting the opportunity for just free-flowing discussion, like thinking, bringing together ideas, pooling stuff, and then coming out of that, come on the fly, almost come motions, come decisions, and so forth. So I'm wondering if you have or anyone really, has a reflection on that and just how you see this work proceeding.
Bahar, do you want to comment first? I know it was directed to me as well, but I'll just.
I think that's a really good point, and I think when I was creating this presentation, I'm just a member of this committee, and I'm bringing in kind of a theoretical thing, trying to make it practical, but the right to housing is practical, right? It's not just a few words that we write on paper and try to get there. So I would love, to your point, like part of a question I had for myself when I was creating this was, how do we hear from others? Can we create maybe a formal, or maybe we can invite people from our committee to kind of present, or maybe do we want to bring in guests from others? And you mentioned earlier there could be guests from different orders of government, from different parts of the city, but also there's so many other organizations, people with living experience that are doing this advocacy work and trying to create those spaces and opportunities. So how do we involve those voices so that we can make better decisions?
So my response to that would be, this will be in how we craft our work plan. And I think what's been really useful today is we've heard what tools are available to us. We got a good rundown of how the machinery in the city works. So what can we make use of? What can we sort of imagine around how it can be used and applied? But then really important to the core of what this committee is about is how do we bring a human rights lens, practice, and approach to those discussions. And I think because we have the constraints of a city committee, that we only have so many meetings in a year and so much time and support available to us and only so much that we can recommend, I think the real art will be as we tease out the work plan and then begin to figure out how do we maximize the human rights approach attached to that work plan, how do we engage community. If not in coming and speaking to this committee, are there other ways that we get the city to engage? So I think The task will be how we are creative in bringing that process and that work plan to life. I'm wrestling with this too. I don't have a plan in my head. I'm listening and absorbing the questions of the other committee members. I'm listening to what we're being instructed by the city. And I think our next meeting or two will really begin to wrestle with what's possible, where do we prioritize. Some of what Bahar has just given us, I think, directs us to the prioritization, prioritizing those in greatest need, those most vulnerable, using tools like maximum available resources, monitoring, figuring out, but then it's applying that to the issues. And we'll hear still from the Housing Secretariat around what's on their agenda in the next period, so that it all has to, I think, be sort of triangulated to come up with a work plan that delivers on that. So I've just been talking for 3 minutes. I'm not sure I said anything tangible. We've got staff advice.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, just to your point, motions don't have to be prepared in advance. If during discussion, when items come up, members come up with something that they would like to make into a motion, clerk staff is here to help, and we can certainly help draft that during the meeting. If it comes down to a timing thing, we can also hold an item down and move on to something else while you work on your motion in consultation, perhaps with the Housing Secretariat staff and with clerk staff. So while we like motions in advance, it's certainly not a requirement, and we certainly appreciate that things evolve during the discussions that happen here.
Thank you for that. Harmy, did I see your hand go up?
You actually read my mind, because I had a follow-up question as to the work plan. Could you tell me a little bit about what's the process to develop our work plan?
So I don't have that yet. I think we're going to hear from the Housing Secretariat today. And then I think that there will be a back and forth with the staff to perhaps present us with some options or a bit of a draft for us to have discussion about. We will decide our work plan, I do believe. I'm looking around for confirmation. Yes. But what we do need is support from the staff to look at what some of the options and what's coming down the pike in terms of the work, and where are we best able to spend our energy to help provide good advice. So it's not a solid plan as yet. I'm looking online. Anne-Marie, yes.
Thank you for that presentation. I think for me, just going right back to the presentation and thinking about why we exist as an advisory committee is for us to really center the knowledge that around rights-based policies and framework, and understanding that the priority has to be around those who are marginalized and facing real barriers to housing. And so I think while we're doing this work is that we really need to keep that in mind, that primarily this work has to be around people who are marginalized and are vulnerable in their situations, and facing real barriers in realizing their rights. So I hope in all of what we're doing, that will remain the center of and the core of why we exist as an advisory committee. Please.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Couldn't agree more. Are there other questions to the speaker or other comments before we move to accept the item? Seeing none, I would say, will someone please move to receive the item for information? Thank you, Lindsay. And all in favor, show of hands, please. That's everybody. Thank you. Carried. And that brings us to the sort of meat of the matter, the Housing Secretariat and the work of housing at the city. So we have a presentation from Valessa Faria, and I think Matt, are you also presenting? You're just moving slides. Okay. There's no just. That's excellent. So over to you.
Good morning again, Chair, members of the committee, and members of the public. I'm Valessa Faria, Director of Housing Policy and Strategy in the Housing Secretariat, and I'm joined by my colleague Matt Hilder. And today we're going to provide you with an overview of the Housing TO 2020-2030 Action Plan. And we'll just wait for Matt to exit so you don't hear me.
Yeah, this is what happens.
Okay, so our presentation today will provide a short context of the, we'll provide the Toronto housing context. We will talk about the City of Toronto's housing plans. We will also discuss our current delivery model at the city in terms of organizational structure. We'll also review some of our key affordable housing supply and preservation programs, and we'll discuss the work plan priorities of the Housing Secretariat in 2024 and 2025. And I think this will be a good basis for you to think about your own work plan as a committee as well. So in terms of Toronto's housing context, so it's no secret that the current context, the current environment is really, really challenging for people who, especially those with low incomes. There's a lack of affordable housing options for low, moderate, and now also middle income households. As of January, there were almost 11,000 individuals experiencing homelessness in our shelter system. And about 48% of Toronto households are renters, and about 40% of those renters are living in unaffordable housing. Also, about 1 in 5 households are living in core housing need, meaning that they're living in unaffordable or inadequate housing. And we see that Indigenous and Black residents continue to be overrepresented in Toronto's homeless population. There's also an increasing demand for housing. While population growth is necessary, it will further increase housing demand. So we see right now, as of the most recent CMHC 2023 market rental report, which was released in January, the vacancy rate in Toronto is about 1.4%. In a healthy housing market, the vacancy would be 3% or more. The average rent for an apartment is also about $1,842, and we know the average social assistance rate is about $500. So there's a big disparity between actual cost and what people can afford. Toronto's population was also about 3 million as of July 2022, and the Government of Ontario estimates that Toronto's population will grow to over 4 million by 2046. The Government of Canada has also set ambitious immigration targets of 465,000 people, new residents into Canada in 2024, and 500,000 new permanent residents in 2025 and 2026. Toronto's rental housing stock is also inadequate to serve current and future demands. Most of our purpose-built rental supply was built in the 60s and 70s. And today we see almost 80% of all rental housing is privately owned, compared to about 15% owned by Toronto Community Housing and the rest by the nonprofit sector. So this came up in Shanali's slides, but I'll touch on it briefly, the role of governments in housing. So at the federal level, the federal government provides national leadership through funding and policy commitments. That's through the National Housing Strategy. They are responsible for designing and delivering major funding and financing programs through Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation and Infrastructure Canada. And the federal government is also responsible for the federal business and income tax system, immigration, refugee, citizenship, among others. At the provincial level, the province regulates land use planning, rental housing, landlord and tenants' rights. So that's through the RTA, Residential Tenancies Act, and also provides the funding framework for housing and homelessness services. The provincial government is also responsible for other housing policies and programs along the continuum, including emergency shelters, funding for supportive housing, long-term care, and healthcare, which came up earlier, as well as income supports. And at the municipal level, like the City of Toronto, municipal governments are responsible for developing local plans and strategies, like our Housing TO plan, which I'll discuss shortly, as well as the delivery of housing programs and services under funding agreements funded by the other levels of government. And we're also responsible for local regulation of land use planning and buildings. So that includes our local official plan plus the zoning, building code, and development review. So the City of Toronto's housing plans. First, I'll talk about the Housing TO 2020-2030 Action Plan. So the Housing TO Plan is Canada's first human rights-based housing plan. It was adopted by Council in December 2019. And this housing plan, this really robust housing plan, provides, we call it the umbrella document at the city, which is our blueprint for all City of Toronto housing actions and investments across the full continuum over the next 10 years. And you can see on the slide with the continuum, this takes into account from emergency shelters to transition and supportive housing to long-term care, all the way to market ownership home. So it's really focused on increasing and maintaining housing supply across the full continuum of housing. So the Housing TO Action Plan, it's a big plan. It includes 76 strategic actions, 76 actions across 13 strategic themes. And I'm not going to go over all of the key actions or themes, but they include predominantly the right to adequate housing, advancing a human rights-based housing, preserving our existing housing supply, increasing the supply of homes, supporting renters, including seniors, and improving housing outcomes for equity-deserving groups, as well as working with other orders of government. So while we do have a robust housing plan, in September 2023, Council directed staff to come back with a plan to further strengthen the housing system. So many of you have probably heard of our generational plan, as we call it, which was approved at Council in November 8th, 2023. It's the generational transformation of Toronto's housing system to urgently build more affordable homes. So it's a big plan, again, focused on amending and strengthening the Housing TO Plan and really taking a systems-based approach. So I will not go over all of the key principles, but ultimately that plan was premised on the need to make a generational shift and strengthen the housing system so that we can adequately serve current needs as well as prepare for future generations. The slide outlines some key actions that were in that generational plan, which includes accelerating the delivery of housing-ready sites. So the plan included 52 sites which are city-owned and which we classified as housing-ready, meaning with additional support and investments from other orders of government, as well as city investments, we can expedite to create new housing. The plan also included 40 additional sites that could be activated to add to our pipeline. It was also focused on streamlining and optimizing our existing resources and technology within the city to expedite the delivery of new homes. So for instance, that includes updating our IT systems, ensuring that all divisions across this big city machine are streamlining our processes, we are better coordinated, and we can ultimately get projects from concept to real homes that people can live in quicker. The plan was also focused on increasing collaboration and supporting the nonprofit and co-op housing sectors to also build more homes on their land, as well as to preserve their existing homes. And ultimately, the plan is focused on, again, intergovernmental collaboration and new tools, understanding that the city is committed to doing everything within our financial and jurisdictional authorities to advance our housing plans, but we absolutely need the other orders of government to join us and to help us move quicker to support or to address the current needs. So big plans, big numbers. This slide shows ultimately what our housing target is, our housing targets are. So if you look at the slide all the way at the top, there's a target of 285,000 homes. This is a target that was assigned to the city of Toronto by the federal government, by the provincial governments, and this target was adopted by council. So this 285 homes includes, I'll say, everything that's residential to be built in the city, from laneway homes to basement apartments to modular homes to new high-rise buildings. Again, everything across the full residential spectrum. If you look down on the waterfall, you'll see 65,000 to the left below the 285. This is the housing TO targets. So the generational plan that I mentioned that was approved in November updated the previous housing TO targets, and now it has increased to 65,000 rent-controlled homes. And if you look further down, you'll see the composition of that 65,000, which includes 17,500 rent-controlled market homes, 47,500 affordable rental homes, which includes net new RGI as well as affordable rental homes. And I should also mention that the that the affordable homes will be, or we have council direction to ensure that these homes are based on income. So the city, through that council direction, has moved to implementing an income-based approach to housing. So the rents essentially would be based on what people can pay. So big plans cost a lot to deliver. So this slide just gives you a snapshot of what the cost of delivering the housing TO plan is. And that is estimated at 44 to 47 billion, with about 33 to 36 billion outstanding from all orders of government. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but ultimately, to deliver the 65,000 units that I mentioned, we need access not only to grant funding, but also to low-cost financing from the federal and provincial governments. So the City of Toronto's housing delivery structure. We've put together a few slides to give you a snapshot of who's involved in housing across the city. So if you look at the slide in the center, the Development and Growth Services. This is a new service area that was established by council last year. A new Deputy City Manager, Jack Sharma, was hired last August and has been tasked with essentially pulling all growth-related services into this new service area so that we can be better coordinated in the way we plan and deliver housing services. And the new service area includes 4 key divisions, including city planning, the Housing Secretariat, Toronto Building, and a new development review division that has been recently set up. So while this big service area is focused on housing planning and delivery, we also work with other divisions and service areas to deliver plans and to realize housing in our city. So if you look to the left of the slide, community and social services, our colleagues in the service area include Toronto Shelter and Support Services, which was formerly SSHA, and whose primary focus is on supporting people in the shelter system. The service area also includes our Seniors and Long-Term Care Division, Toronto Employment and Social Services. Below that, corporate services, our colleagues in corporate services who support housing delivery is our Corporate Real Estate Management Division, and this division essentially manages all of the city's real estate holdings. If you look to the right, infrastructure services, municipal licensing and standards. Many of you well familiar with MLS, as we call this division. MLS is in charge, for instance, for delivering the Rent Safe program, which is monitoring how high our buildings and landlords are improving services for residents across the city. There's also a number of city corporations and agencies that directly deliver housing and work closely with the Development and Growth Services area. And that includes Toronto Community Housing Corporation and Toronto Seniors Housing Corporation, who manage our social housing portfolios. And there is Creatio as well that you may be familiar with. Creatio is the city's real estate agency that supports delivery of the Housing Now program, which I'll get to which the Housing Secretariat oversees. This is another slide. I'm not going to go into this one, but it's for your reference. You can have a look at the various divisions and service areas that I just mentioned and learn a bit more of what they do. So now we'll talk about some of our key affordable housing supply and preservation programs. So these are the programs that ultimately produce the bricks and mortar that people live in. So one program that you've probably heard a lot about recently is the Multi-Unit Residential Acquisition, or MURA program as we call it. So this is a program that provides grant funding and financial incentives to qualified nonprofits and Indigenous housing organizations, including co-ops and land trusts, to essentially acquire at-risk market housing and convert it to permanently affordable homes. So as an example, there are a number of multi-tenant homes or rooming houses across the city that nonprofit organizations have acquired, and by doing so have secured these homes as permanently affordable for 99 years. And this program really grew out of community mobilizing and strong support from Councillor Gord Perks in Parkdale, and it has been, I would say, one of our most popular programs in recent years, and has really gained momentum. And this year in the budgets, for those of you who were following the budget process really closely, the mayor and council have allocated $41 million towards this program in 2024. So that's very exciting. This started off also as a pilot program in Ward 14, in Ward 10. Yes, exactly. With if I recall, Councillor Perks, $1.1 million. So to see this grow to $41 million in a very short period of time is really exciting. So in addition to MURA, the city also has the Open Door program. So this is a program that was approved in 2016 to stimulate the development of affordable housing construction. So essentially the city provides, through this program, grant funding and a waiver of fees and exemptions, and also fast tracking of approvals to get shovels in the ground quicker. This program has been, I would say, very successful until most recently, when through Provincial Bill 23, we lost our source of revenues or funding that was used to provide grant funding through this program. And for the city, that's about $130 million loss in revenues per year. So since Bill 23, we have not been able to advance the grant funding portion of this program to support more nonprofit as well as private sector projects that will deliver permanent affordability for us. So just highlighting this for the committee, because this continues to be a big advocacy point for us within the Secretariat and across the city, where we highlight to the provincial government that in the absence of backstopping us and providing a new funding source, we will be challenged to meet our shared housing targets. The city also has the Housing Now initiative that many of you have probably heard of. So this was launched in 2019 to essentially leverage city-owned lands near transit to create complete communities. So through this program to date, we've allocated 22 large city-owned sites near transit, and ultimately the program aims to deliver 10,000 new affordable rental homes within mixed income, mixed use, and complete communities. And the homes will be delivered through a range of sites, sizes, and typologies. And ultimately, all of the homes to be delivered through the Housing Now program will be affordable in perpetuity, so 99 years. And the ultimate one of the key objectives of this program is also to maintain public ownership of land, so the sites are offered through 99-year leases. Since the pandemic, the city also launched the Modular Housing Initiative, and this is, you may have seen some of our sites that have gone up across the city. The first one being 321 Dover Court, the second being 11 Macy in Scarborough. So Modular housing is essentially a quicker way, a more cost-effective way of scaling up small-scale infill housing. The city aims, through the housing plan, is committed to creating about 1,000 modular homes, and to date, Council has approved the construction of over 500 modular homes. I'll not go into too much detail, but again, some of the benefits of modular construction include quicker construction timelines, reduction in on-site construction and pollution, and less waste because these homes are essentially produced in a factory and assembled on-site. So now we'll talk about some of our work plan priorities in 2024 and 2025. Again, this is staff identified priorities, which may be helpful for you as a committee as you think of developing your own work plan. So the first one for us is to, and this is council directed, for staff to recommend a new community housing sector strategy aimed at protecting existing nonprofit and co-op homes and increasing the stock of net new nonprofit and co-op homes. Staff in the Housing Secretariat and across city divisions are actively working on the strategy and intend to bring a report to the Planning and Housing Committee over the next couple of months. Part and parcel of that, or tied to that initiative, is also an update of the Open Door program, which I just mentioned. So when the Open Door program was first approved at council, it was primarily focused on supporting only affordable homes. Since then, through our generational report, we also have a target for rent-controlled market homes, recognizing that we also need to, in tandem, scale up homes for essential workers and others in our city who need some workforce housing. So we will be looking at the Open Door program through that new lens and coming back to the Planning and Housing Committee and Council to recommend essentially an expansion of the current program. Staff are also working on developing a new renovictions bylaw and a housing at risk table, which is essentially a coordination table to make sure that city divisions and agencies that support renters in our city are more coordinated, and we can support people who are at risk of evictions or have recently been evicted. We will also focus on implementation and monitoring of our new regulatory framework for multi-tenant houses, also known as rooming houses. As many of you may know, the new licensing framework for multi-tenant homes will come into effect at the end of this month. And we've been working with a number of you, including some around the table, to make sure that we plan for successful implementation, recognizing that this is also an area that we will continue or need to continue to closely monitor and maybe pivot some of our current programs and strategies to ensure that renters are supported. We will also continue to work on accelerating the delivery of new rent-controlled homes on lands owned by the city as well as the nonprofit sector and co-op sectors. We will continue to implement the city's housing action plan, which includes advancing planning studies and removing planning and zoning barriers to new housing supply. We will also, in 2025, come back to committee and council with a midpoint review of progress made against delivery of the housing TO plan. So this is an item which the committee may wish to keep a close eye on. This will be, I guess, a key pivotal point in the plan where the collective we may need to pivot depending on the macro environment and where we feel that the plan may be falling short in terms of its intended outcomes. And we will also work to deliver this is with our colleagues, or primarily our colleagues in Toronto Shelters and Support Services. They will work to deliver the new homelessness services capital infrastructure strategy. So this brings us to the end of the presentation. I know there was a lot to absorb there. Hopefully it was informative, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Valessa. We have speakers, so I'm just going to turn to the clerk. I think we have hear from the speakers before we hear from the committee. Okay, so we have two deputants. Is that the correct term? So we have two deputations to hear. I'll ask you to stay there because we're going to have questions from the committee after. Oh, they got to get out of the way, sorry. Learning curve, okay. So our first speaker is Miguel Avila Velarde. I believe he is online.
Good morning, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Is your camera on?
No, I'm on the phone.
Okay, that's great. So it's all, over to you. You have 5 minutes. Off you go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm a strong believer that housing is a human right. For those who don't know me, my name is Miguel Avila. I'm a regular at City Hall and other agencies of the City of Toronto. TCAC is my landlord. I live in Regent Park. Sadly, we have been shot again by gun violence in my community, and that is sad. And during this time, we're having discussions in the community about how to address all problems in the community, such as the availability of RGI units in Regent Park, specifically for phases 4 and 5. Many of our mothers of Regent Park have said that their grown-up children, they don't have no future in Regent Park, and they're being asked to take other addresses available, or if they are available, in TCAC portfolio. Some of the children decide to go outside the city, which break up the family unity. It shouldn't be that way. Currently, our population is made up of 30% TCAC residents versus 70% of market rent residents. This situation can change if the 6,500 new RGI units approved by this past 2024 city budget could add more opportunities for the local residents of Regent Park and their children to stay in Regent Park. Also, we have asked for opportunities for home ownership programs, rent to own, and also we have Noah from the Housing Secretariat coming to our community about 2 weeks ago to give us an update on phases 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we see the same problem. We're not addressing the lack of affordability and more RGI units. I believe for phase 4 and 5, we're only going to create 600 more units, but that's it. We feel that we need to create more opportunities for residents of Regent Park and for our indigenous community. There is a potential opportunity for a co-op, an indigenous co-op at 500 Dundas Street East, which has been for the last 18 years the storefront of Daniels Corporation. So we hope that there's funding available to make this dream a reality, to build an indigenous co-op in Regent Park. So that will be my conclusion of my deputation today, and we hope that always human rights, housing is a human right, always it should be on the top priority for the government of Mayor Olivia Chow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Just before we go to the next speaker, I would like to see if anyone from the committee has a question for you. Seeing none, thank you very much, Miguel. And we will move now to our next speaker, who is Nikki Ward, who is here. So over to you, Nikki.
Thank you. Check. Am I on here? Great.
Firstly, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you all, Madam Chair, Councillor Perks, and honoured committee members, and friends I have yet to meet, but looking forward to meeting in the future from the Housing Secretariat. My name is Nikki Ward, and I have the honour to serve as President of City Park Co-op. Now, cooperative housing, I've seen lumped in on the same category as not-for-profit, and while cooperative housing is not-for-profit, it's a very different beast to what I would describe as institutional or faith-based housing. Within the housing, social housing umbrella, you have things like TCHC, which is obviously municipally supported. Institutionally, you have things like faith-based organizations, which are obvious. Less obvious are groups like Fred Victor, who provide a certain amount of housing. And then you have the cooperative housing sector, which is very, very different. The first considerable difference is that we are driven by democracy. Our budget, our policy, how we conduct ourselves is voted on by every single member. That, to my mind, is by definition equity in action. And it is for that reason, at City Park Co-op, almost all of our residents, our members of vulnerable groups of one sort or another. 42% of our residents are seniors, aging in place. We are what is called a naturally occurring retirement community, meaning that our members get older and older, and we are not able to allow younger people in. That 42% number just goes up and up and up. And the good news is that places like City Park are amazing places to live. Not only are they very safe, they are very affordable, and they're just nice places to live. We support each other. Cooperative housing is participatory in nature. So we have an amazing aging in place program where where members help each other out. We have an amazing literacy program with people. We run our own library, help people with computers, help people with third age learning, going back to school perhaps later in life to follow up on a passion. So I see all of these aspirational things, and there are amazing things on the list: lack of precariousness, cultural sensitivity, equity, genuine engagement. I see all of those things, and I see them on the aspirational list, and I know from my work at City Park that we have that already, that we have a system that works. I have never heard anybody say, ever, we need fewer co-ops. And yet, in the past 30 years, we have seen none. Now, that's not because of the ill will of people at this table. On the contrary, everybody here I believe to be people of good spirit. But the challenge is that co-ops are member-driven. Not-for-profit is, putting it mildly, we run things on a shoestring. So we need help from groups like you and from the City of Toronto to help multiply, to help build capacity. We've got an amazing solution. And we keep that pretty quiet because we're pretty busy just doing our thing. Now, we do receive tremendous help from the Housing Secretariat, but because we're a slightly different beast, sometimes the city processes, government process, actually work against all of us. And if there's one thing I would like to come out of this is for a recommendation for the Housing Secretariat and anybody else who is particularly interested to have conversations, to have collegial discussions with groups like ours to see what can we do to preserve this amazing thing we have. Because my experience here is that co-ops are very, very, very stable. I'll just give you a few statistics. City Park Co-op is the largest co-op, not just in Toronto, not just in the downtown core. It is the largest co-op in Canada. We have 1,000 residents. We have no debt. We operate at a level that is substantially less than any other method of delivering housing to people. So I invite anybody who's interested to figure out how we'll share it. It's not a closely guarded secret. We are post-mortgage, means we have no mortgage left, and we're in a situation now where we need to move into the next realm of doing things, maybe expanding the co-op to neighboring areas. It is frustrating, I think, to many of us to see this low-hanging fruit available. You have many tasks ahead of you that are aspirational and large in nature, and God bless you in that endeavor. But I'd also ask to maybe put some recommendations for some of the low-hanging fruit that is out there. I see I'm running low on time, but I'll ask your indulgence for one small component here to talk about how this affects equity. We have situations now, because we're governed by many different levels of government, where we have precariousness within our own environment. And we're having our general members meeting next Thursday. You're all invited. And the challenge we have here of my 1,000 members that I'm honored to represent is they live in fear. They live in fear of what's going to happen next. Because we're post-mortgage, will we get the help we desperately need? I'm confident, because of our working relationship with the city in the past, that we'll figure this out. But right now, we don't have a clear working relationship. We don't have clear guidelines as to how to work with co-ops. And that creates, obviously, tremendous nervousness amongst everybody, including this particular president. So I'll finish my remarks now and say thank you very much for your indulgence, Madam Chair, and I'll field any questions if there are any at this time.
Thank you very much for your comments. Are there any questions from the committee of the speaker? Yes.
It's just a comment, and I fully agree. I support that, and I've seen this across the board, like Howard Park in near High Park. So I really appreciate you speaking today.
Well, thank you very much, and good luck in your endeavors. Thank you.
We have another question from Anne Marie. Go ahead.
Oh, hello, Anne Marie.
Hi, hello. It's not a question, it's more of a statement. Thank you so much for sharing and for just really just emptying your heart out to us. I hear you. I want to add to that to say, before I owned my own home, I lived in a co-op, and it was the best thing that could have ever happened for me and my child. Many of the things you talk about, I echo that. It was a family. Like it wasn't about like me being in a co-op space on my own, but everyone looked out for each other. I was very active in that co-op space, worked really well in that space, ensuring that everyone takes on the responsibility of caring for the space and creating a safe space for everyone, but also a thriving place. And I can tell you that much. I benefited from being that space for a good 7 years, and I was able to stay in that space and work and save money to purchase my own home. So I know that co-op serve a really, really, really good purpose. And I hear you, and I hope that from your conversation today or from your appeal, that we can take some of what you're saying and continue to build on these premises to make Toronto like a better place for everyone. There is space for all of these things that we're talking about, and I'm so happy to be able to be in the space again, to be able to add value to conversations like your own. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. And if there are no other comments, thank you very much, Nikki, again. And I would invite Valessa back in so that we can ask questions. I think you can stay from there. Okay. B, I think you had your hand up before we went to the deputations. Do you still have a question for Valessa?
Yeah, I was wondering.
Can you use your microphone? Oh, sorry. Thank you.
I was wondering, the high-rise building, the market rent control. How about the MTH, multi-tenant houses? Because I found the rent is incredible, up a lot. Before COVID, it's this much. I paid $430, okay, for basement, one room, share everything, and then because I'm homeless, I have to go and look for places. It is like basement. Basement has its own unit. COVID time, it was 1,500. Okay, that's only one room. Okay. Recently, with the increase of property tax, they marked up again. It was 2,000 now. I can't even afford with this COP subsidy or housing allowance or whatever allowance you can give us. We can't even pay that.
Through the chair, so the city's doing a couple of things. So the MURA program that I mentioned, when we support groups to acquire homes, one of the requirement is that they keep the rents. We set an affordable level for the rents, so they keep the rents as affordable for 99 years. We've also, for the new multi-tenant licensing framework, we've also, or council this week will be looking at a staff report which recommends a new program to support landlords, existing landlords, to maintain their homes, to meet the licensing requirements. If that report is approved, landlords who qualify for any city grants or incentives will be required to also maintain rents at a certain level as set by city staff. So,
my other question is, most of the MTH housing, they are quote unquote illegal. They don't file income tax. You know, when it comes to file rental tax, they don't file that. And I had a hard time to get the rent receipt from them because of this, the new framework, thinking that, you know, without the legal MTH, tenant will be displaced, right? So I'm very aware of that. So before, I don't care whether it's a receipt or not because the rent is not much. But now, because a big amount of money or rent, I ask for a receipt also in thinking that, you know, what happened if it's not legal, then I'll be kicked out and displaced, and I have to find another place again. It's a lot of trouble. I had hard time to find now already. So I tried to ask for a receipt. Most of them don't want to give a receipt. And so my question is, how are you going to get, you know, the rent control, you know, to create something policy about that?
Through the chair, that is one of the key reasons why the city is moving to make sure that these multi-tenant homes are legally licensed and operating. So one is to ensure ultimately that people like yourselves and others who live in these multi-tenant homes have access to safe, well-maintained homes. The licensing framework will also require landlords to essentially be operating legally. So that means that they will need to provide you with certain rights. They will have obligations. And ultimately, this is focused on improving housing conditions for tenants across our city.
So I think you really have to go and dig out those illegal MTH. Because a lot of them, they would not report to you that they are renting out. You know what I mean? It's a big job.
Great. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other questions for Valessa Bahar?
You spoke to one of your priorities for this year is to create the midpoint review of progress by 2025. Can you speak a little bit to how our advisory committee can, in our monitoring work, how in like the process works in terms of contributing to that?
Thanks for the question, through the chair. So what I should have mentioned in my presentation as well is that last year staff launched new dashboards. So we can provide a link following this meeting with a dashboard that looks at our progress on key indicators that are in the housing plan. For instance, number of affordable units that were built, number of renters that have received a rental subsidy, and a number of other indicators. So that's one avenue where you can continuously look at progress. We update, the dashboards will actually be updated annually. So each year the Housing Secretariat brings a pretty robust report to council, to committee and council, saying these are our targets, annual targets, as well as targets to date. This is what we've accomplished. These are some of the key risks in terms of why we're not meeting certain targets if our indicators are red. So that, I think that report or those reports will be really helpful for you. Our next report is scheduled to come to the Planning and Housing Committee in July. And that would essentially set the framework, I think, for this committee to start thinking about what perhaps needs to be changed and where we need to pivot to make sure that by 2030, ultimately 340,000 households across our city are living in improved housing conditions.
Thank you, Valessa. Other questions? Nicole.
Yes, thank you. So I'm wondering, from that presentation, are we able to clarify what the meaning of affordable housing is? Just going through the presentation, I'm recognizing that a lot of times when we're talking about affordable housing, it's not for the public, it's more so for, developers and folks of that like. So yeah, can we clarify what affordable housing would look like, or what it does currently look like when we're talking about it for people that are underhoused?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole, and through the chair. As I mentioned in the presentation, last year when council adopted the new generational plan, it directed that all future programs and projects reflect an income-based definition of housing. And that income-based, again, it's based, the affordable definition will be based on people's income versus the market, which was the previous definition. So we can provide you with additional details. Ultimately, the new definition is under the city's official plan, and it's recalculated annually, again, based on incomes. And when we, as an example, when we deliver new homes, there will be an income threshold for the per bedroom type, which we can share with you. So happy to maybe provide this committee with the methodology and how that works. But ultimately, council directed that we move from a market-based approach to an income-based approach, because as we know, market rents have increased much quicker than incomes for at least the past 2 decades.
B, is your microphone on so the people on the online can hear you?
I was wondering, should that word affordable change to deeply affordable? Because to most of the recipient of social assistance, that affordable, that word is not really applied to us. Look at the OW. When my Harris cut until this year, the rent is not increased at all.
Thanks for the question, B, and through the chair. So we talk about affordable, but the housing plan also has a target for net new rent geared to income, which will provide the types of homes for people on social assistance that need to pay deeply affordable rents.
I understand that. If you go to RGI or housing like that, that apply 30% of your income. But my question is, most of the social assistance recipient, they rent MTH. And to those kind of housing, MTH housing is not based on your 30% of your income. Unless you are recipient of COP or some kind of housing supplement or housing allowance, then they will base on your income to determine that, the allowance 70% of your income, and then the people who are receiving the subsidy is 30% of the income. So how are you going to get that to those people who are renting MTH housing?
Thanks for the question. My first answer to this committee through the chair. So one of the important things we're going to be doing with the new framework and with these rooming houses being legal across the city is actually monitoring rents. Like, we haven't had access to very good data and information around rental levels. So that's part of what we'll be doing. I think the other thing is we recognize many of those homes are in the private rental market. So we develop programs and policies to provide funding and incentives to try and bring them within our scope of control as a city so that we can make sure they're affordable. But the other thing that we have done many times, I think, or City Council rather, has done is requested the province increase social assistance rates. We know that that's a direct correlation to people's ability to afford housing in this city. And so that's been a request of council for a long time, recognizing that that is something that would have an impact across the housing continuum in the City of Toronto beyond our ability through the individual programs that we deliver.
Thank you, Matt. I think we're hitting on a core theme that's going to run through this committee's work, because affordability is such a defining part of realizing the right to housing. So I think it's important that it's being identified right out of the gate as critical, and everything from how we define it to the advocacy around it and addressing the very real issues of deep affordability and income adequacy, I think will be part of a much longer set of deliberations for this committee. Thank you for that. I'm a little mindful of the time. We can go over. We only have one item left, but we had a very full presentation. So if there are other questions for the Housing Secretariat before we close this item, I'll just take a view if there's anyone that has a question or comment at this point. Seeing none, I would ask for a motion to receive this information. Thank you, Councillor Perks. All in favor, can I see a show of hands? Thank you. That was everybody? Yes, and carried. Thank you very much. Oh, really? Yeah. Really. I like all the formality. I don't. All right. All right, Gord. So we're at our last item on the agenda. Yes. 2 items. Oh, no. Oh, sorry. 2 items. Next is election of a vice chair. As was explained to us, I am acting as the chair. We need a vice chair should I not show up, so someone can sit in my place to do the administration of the meeting. This is a position that we elect as a committee. And so at this point, I am calling, I'm going to stick to the script so I don't go sideways. Are there any nominations for vice chair of the Housing Rights Advisory Committee? You can nominate yourself or someone else. So the question is out. Are there any nominations at this time? Bahar.
I'd like to nominate, if you agree, Anne-Marie.
All right, we have a nomination. Do you accept the nomination, Anne-Marie? Yes. Okay. Do I ask for others? Oh, I still have to go through. Okay, so member Bahar has nominated Anne-Marie. Marie accepts the nomination. I am calling for nominations a second time. Are there any further nominations for vice chair? B.
Nominate Joy.
All right. B nominates Joy for vice chair. Joy, do you accept? Joy does not accept the nomination. But thank you. I am calling for nominations a third and final time. Are there any further nominations for vice chair? Seeing none, the nominations are now closed. As Anne-Marie is the only nominee, I declare Anne-Marie elected as vice chair of the Housing Rights Advisory Committee for a term of office from March 18th, 2024 to November 14th, 2026. Congratulations, Anne-Marie. We are now linked.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you for accepting. All right. So with that, we have one final item. 2024 meeting schedule for the Housing Rights Advisory Committee. This is an information item. The clerk's office has recommended 3 more meeting dates for 2024. I believe that they are in the agenda document. Should we review the dates? The dates are, the next meeting will be Monday, May 13th, 2024 at 9:30 a.m. here in the committee room, again with a hybrid option. The third meeting, this is the first, that's the second. The third meeting will be Monday, September 23rd, 2024, 9:30 a.m. in this committee room, also with a hybrid option. And the fourth meeting for 2024 will be Monday, November the 4th at 9:30 a.m., again in this committee room with the option of a hybrid participation. So, are there any questions or comments on the scheduling of the meeting dates? I encourage you to put them boldly in your calendar so we can have everybody here. And seeing no questions or comments, can I have a motion to receive the item as information? Harmy, thank you. What's that? Just to receive it. I have a motion to receive the information. So moved by Harmy. We don't vote on it? Will we vote on it? Votes, show of hands, please. And we are good to go. And could I please have someone move the motion to, oh no, we don't have anyone to excuse. That concludes our business for today. Thank you everyone for participating. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much. 12:31. Not bad. Thank you.
Recording has stopped.
Okay. Thank you for the great notes.